Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to our second webinar on the Gender Equity Index. Really pleased that you took the time to be with us today. Fantastic. Well, welcome. A number of you already know who we are, and that's why you decided to join up. But we are Equal Origins, just recently changed our name from the Partnership for Gender Equity. We're Washington, D.C. based, United States, women-led, not-for-profit social enterprise. We're working to elevate the voice and visibility of farming women and their families in both the coffee and cocoa sector. Our approach is through research and providing tools for industry to be successful on a journey to greater gender equity. And one of the main tools that we have now is our Gender Equity Index, which we will be talking about today. Joining me here is my colleague, Greg Minahan. A number of you know him. You see a bit about our backgrounds there. I'm going into my 30th year in coffee since starting my career in Costa Rica about 30 years ago. So it's been a long and interesting trajectory, much change with regards to sustainability initiatives, sustainability efforts, and the focus on gender in the coffee sector, which is core to the work that we're talking about today. Greg, is there something you would like to say?
I've worked quite a long time in various social service organizations supporting domestic violence and other women's issues. And pre-coffee, worked extensively with World Coffee Research for several years on a multi-stakeholder initiative there. But really for the last 2 years, really have been joined at the hip with Kimberly Eason, and we've gone on this journey together, developing the Gender Equity Index and its launch now.
Great. And also here with us, so you see her video, our back end is Sarah Beard. And Sarah has played a very important role in supporting us to put together the Gender Equity Index. Great. So what we're going to do today is talk through the context for gender equity in the coffee and cocoa sector. We're going to dig in a bit to the Gender Equity Index and talk a bit about where can we go together, both in coffee and cocoa. And I see also John Kehoe's here. So we do have a chocolate person represented. So welcome, John, along with everybody else. So with regards to gender, in the past 15 years or so, there has been more focus on gender equity in the coffee sector. And the current practice in coffee in particular, but also cocoa, we've seen efforts, is to highlight women entrepreneurs, seek better employment opportunities for women, and also focus on buying products directly from women in cooperatives or women farm owners, and really focus on elevating the profile of women entrepreneurs in the sector. These are women that are in leadership roles, that are providing important role models for women across the global coffee sector. And this is really critical, important work that plays an important role in educating consumers, educating the broader industries about the importance of gender equity and women's empowerment in both of these significant, far-reaching sectors. Gender equity in agriculture is a complex system. You see here 5 interrelated dimensions of gender in agriculture. You have land rights, decision-making, employment, household labor, access to productive resources. And all of these interrelated dimensions underpin gender inequality and gender equity more broadly in the sector. And within both coffee and cocoa, the large part of the investment from the sector itself does go into productive resources. There's a lot of training, capacity building, extension work happening in coffee and cocoa. And that is where mostly the focus in terms of the sphere of responsibility of both of the sectors tends to lie. Now, there have been over time a number of projects funded by development agencies where within the past 15 years, USAID, GIZ, and other development funders have started to require a gender component as part of all development funding that they provide in coffee and cocoa. And with the coffee companies that are working, a lot of the investment goes into training and extension.
And I think this really, I think that really does speak on the productive resource here. One of the points that we're trying to make with this slide is that very often what we found in many of our discussions is that the industry is looking for that area of responsibility. There is, there's a lot of organizations that are, for instance, very focused on working on getting land rights situations improved, getting women on the titles to land, membership into cooperatives and the benefits of all of those things. And those are fantastic projects that are happening. They're not happening as part of standard protocol in all operations in this way. They tend to be special projects that are implemented. But the one area for sure that most are participating in the industry is this idea of capacity building at the farm level, improving yields, yield curves, agroforestry projects, carbon management projects. And so this place where the industry really has a connection, a frontline connection to producers, where they're actually talking to producers and getting out onto the farm. This connection point is where the Gender Equity Index really focuses its energy.
Thanks, Greg. The Gender Equity Index, as Greg was starting to talk about, what we're looking at is focusing on the hidden workforce in coffee. So leading in from the work that's been done or being done on women's coffee, women's cocoa, women's entrepreneurship. So those tend to be the visible women in coffee and cocoa sector. What the Gender Equity Index looks to address is that hidden workforce. These are women that are working inside of male-headed households, where the male is the landowner, the male is the member in the cooperative, and traditionally in these coffee producing and cocoa producing countries, but coffee in particular, is known to be a man's crop, and that women's work is supplementary, plays a supporting role. Yet data, for example, from the ICO highlight that women perform anywhere from 30 to 80% of labor on the farm, and that does not count the household labor that women perform, without which the farm wouldn't function. The context for women in coffee and cocoa has many different facets. We looked at the complexities in that former graph. There are issues of the vast amount of labor that women invest in ensuring that crops can also be exported. Women are also responsible for food crops, often grown on the farm. They work to try to sell other food crops in the market, or other crops in the market, to earn additional household income. And oftentimes what happens is, when coffee is considered a man's crop, the woman is expected to also provide labor into coffee and also cocoa. And oftentimes that work is not recognized. It's not remunerated. It is underappreciated in terms of the importance of the role, and also then the critical nature of the woman's voice, both in the household and in the community, in terms of what kinds of crops should be planted on the farm, how to decide how to spend income from export goods like coffee and cocoa. And so there's a real risk that coffee, that many of us I know in the specialty coffee sector we have an assumption that coffee is a positive, is an opportunity for coffee farming families to work their way out of poverty. Um, the challenge, though, is that when we invest in sustainability programs without a gender lens, we actually have the potential risk of doing harm, especially doing harm in cases where women may prefer to be doing other kinds of work that would help them put food on the table. Or in the context where women are not invited to participate in household decision making, then you can actually see that coffee can exacerbate food insecurity and productivity of other crops on the farm. With the Gender Equity Index, what we're solving for specifically is that women are not accessing and benefiting from extension and advisory services. And so these are services that would help ensure that women can be successful. And it also supports them to develop agency and more voice, both within the farming households and the communities, the farmer organizations. You're going to hear us, when you hear about the Gender Equity Index, talking about extension and advisory service providers. What we mean by that are the public, private, or civil society organizations that are providing technical guidance and assistance to farmers and farmer organizations. So this can be inputs and other training that farmers can then leverage to increase sustainable production and increase their income from agriculture. So if we think about our trading companies like Cargill or Ecom, Sukafina, and others, or development organizations like Lutheran World Relief or TechnoServe, Ricolto, and others, or government extension agencies like the Colombian Coffee Federation or NIAB in Rwanda or the Cocoa Bot in Ghana. Those are the kinds of organizations that we're talking about that provide extension and advisory services to farmers and farmer organizations. So I'm curious here, if we could put up the other poll. What is your role, of those of you that are participating today, regarding extension and advisory services? What's the role of your organization? Do you fund extension or advisory services for farmers? Do you subcontract any extension and advisory services from others? Do you make qualitative evaluations of service providers in the field? Recommend or assemble EAS teams for projects or initiatives? And you can check multiple. So we'll give you 30, 40 seconds here to respond to this. There's also a not applicable, I think, or does it not show up? Maybe it doesn't. Okay, well, if it's not applicable, then obviously you can't respond.
Yeah, no, you scroll down to find.
Oh, is it there? Okay. Oh, great. Okay, great. Yeah, so we should be able to get everybody to respond here.
Okay, looks like 60. Oh, there we go. A few more. 24 of 36. I'll end the poll. And there it is.
Great.
So yeah. this tool is particularly well suited for these roles and these activities. So I think you're going to be able to begin to see how the Gender Equity Index can support these various activities on this poll.
Yeah, and as we're going through, please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A, and we will make sure we get to those as we get to the end. Okay, Great. Thanks so much for your responses. Okay. In 2021, we conducted research. Some of you are aware of this research, and we can drop the link to that research in the chat there. So in case you haven't had a chance to read it, or you can actually scan that QR code with your phone. We interviewed quite a few coffee and cocoa EAS service providers. And what we learned was that most services do not reach or benefit women. They're not designed or implemented considering the needs, constraints, or concerns of women. And they're not yet being measured with sex disaggregated data collection or KPIs. And so this really helped to underscore what Greg and I had learned in our early conversations about the opportunity for the Gender Equity Index, that there really did seem to be a gap and an opportunity in this area of enhancing existing extension and advisory service provision to be gender equitable. So what we did in 2021 and into and now finalizing now in this year was we brought together these organizations who put funding in place. I know we have Craig from Berry House here. I'm not sure if we have any of our other partners on this particular call, but each of these companies invested financial resources as well as their time. We wanted to make sure that the Gender Equity Index was fit for purpose for the industry needs. Most of the companies here are coffee related. We did have e-com specifically looking at cocoa within their supply chain, and a couple of development agencies as well. We also brought together a panel of gender experts. These are all women who came from different areas of background. So we have researchers, we have Jane from the International Finance Corporation, women who had done a lot of work with development of smallholder farmer ag, both in coffee and cocoa, mostly in Africa, involvement in fair trades and other kinds of standards, and benchmarking experience. So with these two separate groups, we were able to weave together the input to build out what are the domains, and the questions behind the Gender Equity Index. So again, to highlight that this approach clearly differentiates between gender programs and projects, and looking at all programs and services within both sectors to be gender equitable. So again, the GEI focuses on this second point, and that our work as Equal Origins, in addition to offering the Gender Equity Index on the platform, is to provide capacity building services that can help ensure accountability and partner success along their journey towards greater gender equity in their service and provision and programs.
And just to put another note on that piece, what we largely find as we survey what's happening with extension and advisory services is that very often there can be multiple pillars to any project that's happening at Origin. There might be a good agricultural practices training, there might be a nursery development piece, and then very often in a project with multiple pillars, there will be a gender pillar. This gender pillar might be something like village savings and loan. It might be approaches to women in leadership position, but it's some sort of specific women-oriented pillar to the project. And those projects very much are reaching and benefiting women. There's no question about that. But again, the Gender Equity Index was designed to take a look at the other piece of that portfolio and to ensure that the good agricultural practices training, the nursery programs, that all of these other pillars were designed, implemented, and monitored and evaluated through that gender lens. So it's an integration strategy here that we're really focused on.
Thanks, Greg. So over the course of about 8 months in 2021, we brought together the input from these two groups and built out the domains of gender equity for extension and advisory service provision. We have 67 questions along these 5 domains. And one of the, I think the more exciting things about how the domains ended up coming together with the input from both groups was that we were able to align the domains with the Reach, Benefit, Empower framework that was created by the Food Policy Research Institute and CGIAR. So there's a lot of interesting and good information online about the Reach, Benefit, Empower, and Transform framework, and the tool itself aligns with that framework and brings in good practice from gender and development, alongside of having been informed by the industry leaders participating in this group. So as you can see here, we've got organizational capacity. The tool itself, again, to highlight, is that what we're looking at is the capacity of extension advisory service providers to provide services in a gender equitable way. Right, so this first domain of organizational capacity is key to that. It's also important that the kind of strategy and analysis that each service provider is undertaking, are they clear where it is they're looking to have the greatest impact? Do they understand who it is that they're talking to? Have they spoken to the women in the different regions where they're offering and providing services? So often services are provided without having understood the needs and the issues that women face in a given region. Again, going back to that, man is often perceived to be a man, or coffee is often perceived to be a man's crop. So you talk to the men, and without understanding the gendered differences and the potential gendered impact, you can leave out the significant contributions of women. With Reach, of course, as it's stated, you're looking to make sure that the services actually reach women. Are they able to show up in equal numbers to men? Is the service that you're providing actually relevant to women? Benefiting women, making sure that the services that are being provided actually address women's needs and how they actually learn. And then the Empower and Transform, what we're talking about there are the more thematic based issues that are faced and that maybe are different from country to country and region to region. So are there specific women's barriers to women's participation, such as maybe providing women's leadership training or masculinities type training?
And also here, there's a real interrelationship between each one of these domains. And without going into too much of it, but for instance, Reach and Benefit. One of the things that we have seen, one of the things that we see is that there is some gender disaggregated data collection in terms of who is attending various trainings. That seems to be something that the industry has been doing for the last few years. But this connection between Reach and Benefit. So what we see in those numbers is that far fewer women are in those trainings. And one of the reasons that fewer women are in those trainings is because those trainings haven't been designed to specifically benefit those women. We have had several anecdotal stories where we hear that an organization might really try a whole lot of different strategies to increase the number of women participating in a good agricultural practices training, for instance, or a financial management course. And the women were just not showing up in satisfactory numbers, and they tried childcare and travel stipends and different times of the programs. They were trying different things to increase the number of participation. What they finally did is talked to the women, so this is back in strategy and analysis, they discovered that actually women weren't showing up because they didn't see the value in that particular training for them. So the program itself wasn't designed with women's needs. And so therefore they weren't showing up because the programs really weren't benefiting from them. When they changed the program using that analysis, they immediately saw a 25-point increase in the number of women that were attending. And again, that was because they had the gender lens. It was designed to benefit women. And then, of course, once you've got a program that's designed to benefit where women are in a specific region, then having them show up to trainings is not as difficult as one might experience otherwise.
Thanks, Greg. So once a service provider takes the diagnostic, takes the GEI, they receive a report. The actual report stays live in the portal. Again, it's 67 questions along the 5 domains, and you can see each company gets their overall score, and that score related to a basic, intermediate, or advanced level of achievement. And then you see the spider chart there on the bottom, which shows where there is more strength as opposed to maybe areas for opportunity. On the right here, you see this is just part of the report, the page 2, where we have recommendations by domain based on the relevant, the relative performance per domain. And then there is a recommendation, a score, and a recommendation for each question. So each of the 67 questions in the 5 domains, if you achieve 100% score, you don't get a recommendation, but for everything else where you have earned less than 100%, you actually get a question specific recommendation. And then, so how this works is that it isn't, especially at this point, it isn't the score. As you saw, that particular score, it was a sample, but many of the scores that we've seen of the initial actors taking the diagnostic is that scores are relatively low. This is a relatively new issue for this sector. And the most important thing is not the score itself, but then what the company actually does with the recommendations. And so the recommendations essentially feed into a gender equity development development plan. We actually want to see companies putting in place a development plan that shows how they intend to make take first actions along their journey to greater gender equity. This gender equity development plan then informs specific gender responsive program design and gender responsive budgeting. So in the example that Greg was speaking about a few minutes ago, oftentimes programs and projects are created and there isn't gender responsive budgeting embedded in the different pillars of the program versus having it just as a side component versus including what's needed in terms of making how to make each component of the project gender equitable. And then from there, the delivery of the services and project implementation should be then on a more gender equitable path. And from there, then the company can come back and take the GEI a second, third, or more times and see the improvement in their score. And that is then where the communications can come in. So you have the interest of the roasters and the brands and the retailers in ensuring a sort of the tool ends up being a sort of a risk assessment, and that requesting that their service providers engage with the GEI and then be able to report on progress over time. So the report itself is a sort of monitor and evaluation progress over time, and then communicating that up the supply chain to partners and investors that are that they're partnering with in the supply chain. And what we're seeing and what we've seen when have different individuals representing different program offices for a larger company. So Ecom, for example, I see our partners from Ecom are here. So taking the test, different people taking the GEI, and then coming together using this this framework as a shared language to understand, okay, well, what are you doing in Ghana? How is that different from what's happening in Ecuador? And being able to share some of the practices across different origins that can help further their progress along their gender development path.
And from a communications point of view, most communications on gender equity are very focused on the specific impact to the women in the program. So you want an emblematic, anecdotal success story of how the Village Savings and Loan account worked in a particular area. And those are great motivating stories that really help to bring home the importance of the work. This is communications in a different area. This is an additional dimension to the gender equity communications, where the organization is really showing self-reflection, really showing their desire to reach and benefit women, and so that you begin to share the service provider's own gender equity journey in terms of the kinds of programs that they're beginning to implement. Their approach to gender, what does that look like? How has their own capacity increased over time in terms of reaching and benefiting women, and sort of what they're learning. So this is a sort of a new and different dimension to communications, but one very much that roasters are interested in hearing from their partners in particular.
Thanks, Greg. So we have a third poll here. You can see the question. We're curious, based on what you know about gender inequality in both coffee and cocoa, and the degree to which existing programs can be gender biased. Do you think that if you if you understood that a particular service provider had a high risk for gender bias, what would you do? Would you choose to look for another provider, do nothing, request an improvement plan, or request an improvement plan and provide assistance?
Yeah, this is great.
I'll give you a few more seconds. We didn't put a not applicable here, but maybe you could put yourself in the shoes of an EAS provider. Great.
And what we're seeing here is that this is also a reflection of our many conversations that we had before developing the tool, was that there was a real desire within the supply chain to work on building that capacity at origin. So the roasters that we spoke to very much wanted to be able to make the claim that all of their sustainability investments were happening as gender equitably as possible. There was a realistic expectation that frontline agronomists weren't going to be gender experts, and that gender bias would likely be part of most programs, and a real willingness to come alongside and to provide some additional support to help that partner make progress on a gender equity development plan that they may have.
Thanks, Brian. Great, thanks for your responses on the poll. Okay, before we go into any questions, I want to tell you where we're headed. So the tool, it's now early April, and our tool is imminently to be made available on the new platform. We will be inviting the next round of Extension Advisory Service providers to take the Gender Equity Index. We would invite you, if you are interested in being in that next round, please to let us know. we're eager to engage with more partners. We are in the process of launching our initial capacity building services. Those include things like advisory support for companies to build out their gender development plan, gender development plan, program design, and gender responsive budgeting. Those are some of the initial services that we have on offer. Other things that we will be doing in the future is gender analysis. So a sort of a fit for purpose gender analysis for the coffee and cocoa sectors. And other things as well. You'll see this point 3. We're in the process of conducting additional research with Yale University to identify local and regional gender expertise. The idea behind that is that if a partner like Ecom sees that they have a particular need or opportunity for improvement in Indonesia, based on what the need is, who might be the local organizations that could provide gender expertise. So we would welcome you and we invite you to let us know if there are organizations that you've already worked with in different parts of the world. Sarah will put the link to the survey in the chat. This is initial research funded by the Women Forward International with Yale Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. We'll have an initial report available May, June time, but we will be continuing that research into the summer because we know what we've been seeing is that there is pretty extensive expertise, and we want to be able to provide a sort of a liaison or a sort of an opportunity to build connections among with service provision and the gender expertise that they need. And during COVID, women's empowerment, the progress on women's empowerment and gender equality has backslid. The global, World Economic Forum gender gap report actually pointed to that now we need a whole additional generation in order to achieve gender parity. And so we would invite and urge all of you on this call and more broadly, both in the coffee and cocoa sectors, to join with us to leverage the Gender Equity Index as that transformative, scalable approach to really drive impact for farming women and their families, and advocate broadly for the uptake of the tool. That is the role that roasters and brands and retailers can play, is really encourage their extension and advisory service providers to engage with the Gender Equity Index, get on a credible journey towards greater gender equity, and engage with Equal Origins to support on that greater journey. And again, there are other organizations that are here on this webinar and that exist that can also provide services. So we really want to drive engagement broadly of gender equity in service provision across the sector. So just a couple of quick things is to support this work if you're able to do so. Advocate for your supply chain partners to engage, and then also we have a variety of events coming up, participating in these webinars and engagement opportunities, upcoming advocacy events, which we'll keep you posted on. So I want to thank you all. That's the formal part of our presentation, and we're grateful to have you all here. We're eager to have your questions or anything that you would like to share. We can actually unmute as well as invite questions written in the chat. And if there aren't any questions or comments that anyone would like to make, we can let you have 15 more minutes back to your day. There's a
We can also say that Kimberly and I will be in Boston this week. Actually, I think Kimberly is already near Boston, so she's hovering close as we speak. So if you'd like to connect to talk more about this, again, I think activating the Gender Equity Index, I think another important thing to realize is that taking the assessment, we're going to have that be no barrier to entry. So it's a free assessment to take. Where PGE can come in is to help orient your team or multiple teams around the tool, assist with the analysis and the interpretation of the results, as well as help to develop that gender equity development plan for the EAS provider. Once a gender equity development plan is produced, then the question is how do we fund the development of that? And this is where gender responsive budgeting comes in across the extension service provision portfolio. We really take a look at the good agricultural practices training or the nursery development program, the carbon management program, and we begin to see, okay, how can we implement elements of that gender equity plan within the context of this particular project? And in this way, really begin to integrate the rest of EAS services and make that accessible and relevant for the women in the supply chain.
Thanks, Greg. We do have a question here about, are we working also on the consuming side? And the question, the answer now is no at the time, for the time being. We have had quite a bit of interest from different companies hearing about the GEI, how might it be applied to them as roasters or brands? And that is something that we're looking at. So if you have interest in that, please do let us know. It's not something on the in the immediate future, but it is something that if there's demand that we would certainly want to look into. So thanks for that question. And I think that's all that we have in terms of questions. So thanks again for joining us today. Thanks, Greg, for being my partner here and helping to highlight the opportunity of the Gender Equity Index. And please do, we can put our emails in the chat. Mine is Kimberly at Equal Origins. Greg is Greg at equalorigins.org. And you can follow us on social media, Equal Origins. And please, yeah, sign up for our newsletter and we'll keep you posted on other things that we have going on. Thanks so much for being here.